Yeah.
Last one. What is the perfect length for a video game?
I feel like I answered this before.
Yeah, but I think it's Last of Us 2 territory. I think that's the highest for me. I would probably go. Like Last of Us for a lot of people, Last of Us Part 2 for a lot of people was probably a little too long for a lot of people. Like I know our friend of ours, MC Fixer,
I
has
think
said that was a little too long for him,
I
but he
think
enjoyed it still.
I think The Last of Us Part Two. I think people will. I think a lot of people who think, and again, some people will just think it was too long in general. I think a lot of people think it might be too long because it pulls.
Because of what it does in the story.
It pulls a Lord of the Rings: Return of the King trick, where you think it ends, but actually there's still another 4 hours left. Like, and that's what The Last of Us
Frodo's
Part
still
Two
gotta get up
does.
that bloody mountain.
Yeah, that's what
Still to this
part.
day get
Yeah,
up that mountain.
Frodo throws the ring in the mountain, it explodes. He sees all of his friends, and you think, cool, the movie must be nearly over, but there's still like 45 minutes of the fucking movie left. Yeah. And it's like, with Last of Us Part 2, it's the same sort of thing, but I actually think it worked in The Last of Us Part 2 because it tied the theme of the game together, and it was the end. It like that was the correct ending, I think, for the story. Um, and like, but like the perfect length for a game is it depends on the game. I feel like it was what I said before, where it's like a game can be really really long, but if it's worth it, if it earns it, right, then that's the perfect length for that game. Whereas like sometimes like Gone Home is like a 2 to 3 hour experience, right? And it's like that's
You
the
can beat it like
perfect.
in 10 minutes, can't you?
You can beat it in less than a minute if you know where you're going, but you never know where you're going the first time you play it. You explore the whole house, and it takes about 2 or 3 hours, and that's the perfect length for that game. Like whereas like I'm trying to think of I've got a list of games in front of me. That's my fucking retro review pile. That's not going to help me. Like a game from this year where it's like, okay, were any of these games the perfect length? Like you get Ori, which is about 10 hours, right? And I think that was probably the perfect length for that game. Like in terms of what it did, its gameplay and its story. Um, that was the perfect length for it. Like it just depends. It just depends. Is my boring answer. Like
I
FF7
agree with
remake
you.
again is another one where it's like 30 hours, but it was the right length for that game.
Yeah, I agree with you, but at the same time, I'm just like, games are getting late a little too long. Valhalla's long as hell, I'm hearing. Legion is like long as hell. Is that Cyberpunk? 175 hours, the bug is nowhere near to finish it, he says. But yes, he's queuing the shit out of that, so we can appreciate. I kind of appreciate that. I really do. But like, the biggest thing what turned me off from Red Dead was just like, this is just, it's too big, it's too
But
long.
again, like the length wasn't your only problem with Red Dead 2, right? So like if the gameplay of that game had been amazing, right, and it had been perfect, or like as near to perfect as it could have been, and all if all of the things that were a problem for you, because I had problems with it too, like Red Dead Two,
Yeah.
but like if all of the things that were a problem for you in that game weren't a problem, you would have played
We
more of
know
it,
that.
and you would have been like, oh, it was like 50 hours, but it was great. I mean, like my game of the year in 2017 was Persona 5, and I spent 100 hours playing that game.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. I think that there's no doubt about what you're saying. You are spot on. Like it's the right. They need to find. I do think they need, but I do believe developers do need to find that more sustainable balance for people in general and everything. Like I'm like worrying like hell that I'll be able to finish a lot of the games that are coming out this year, even if I am on my 2 week break from college and everything in the end of the month, at the end of December. I'm still gonna be like that, and I'm just like, it's I think they need to find that right sustainability for it, and I don't think it's like after that, especially after that article that we read about open world games and how they fundamentally need to change and everything, and I do believe they do to
They
a
do,
certain
yeah,
amount,
they
to the
do.
part where they are too big, I think sometimes, and they're too long. Like I say, I appreciate on the money side. They need that longevity for people to be
Yeah.
constantly playing it over and 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 over again.
Or just like feeling like they're getting their money's worth out of it, right? Like,
Yeah,
if you spend like 60 to 70 quid on a game, some people will expect that game to be something they can play for a long time. Whereas me personally, I would rather have a tighter experience.
yeah.
So like when you talk about like Ubisoft games, right, as an example, like they're open world games, they're so full of shite, right? And sometimes you'll play one of their games and the game will be like, cool, you need to go and level up, which means you need to go and do some of this shite. And then it's like, I don't want to do some of this shite because
Yeah,
it's
I think
shite.
it's the forcing part in it. It's the forcing part. They're telling you have to do this when fundamentally you don't want. You shouldn't. You shouldn't be told you have to do this.
Exactly.
It should be. It should be kind of like the thing of going back to like one of the things I always heard. What was great, even though we were talking about off screen, about a Fallout game was I left the room and then boom, there was this open world and I could go in anywhere direction and it didn't tell me where I needed to go.
Yeah.
I can just go in anywhere where I wanted to go. And that's what I think it is fundamentally what has drawn me off from these type of games
Right.
now, the big world games that I'm thinking, no, you have to do this. I'm thinking, but I don't want to do this. I want to do it how I want to do it, not how
So-
you want me to do it.
There are two games that really nail this. This will have to be the last thing. There are two
Yeah.
games that really nail this in terms of side content, right? The Witcher 3 was one of them, and Fallout New Vegas was another one. And the way they do it is those games are also full of a lot of stuff. Notice how I didn't say shite. Those games are full of a lot of stuff. The stuff is interesting. So when
Yeah,
you come across that stuff that's not the main story, like you're pulled into it without even thinking about it because it's something you want to do. It's not like, oh shit, I've got to do this fortress in Assassin's Creed, right? Like even though I don't want to, like, because I just want to continue the main story. I want to do the parts of the game that are engaging me. But, like, I have to go and do this other thing. And it's like in The Witcher 3 and in Fallout New Vegas, like you come across a situation, you come across a side quest, you come across a monster hunt, and you just do it without thinking that it's superfluous, and it is superfluous, but it's so well made and so well integrated into the rest of the game that it works. Whereas in a Ubisoft game, and I know I'm bagging on about Ubisoft games, but there's tons of games that do this really badly. Like, the side content sometimes even feels like it's from a completely different game than the game that you've been playing. And it's just there because they need something to put in this part of the map, otherwise it's going to be too empty. Now that's my answer.
I'm gonna be raving about Cyberpunk, aren't I?
Well,
by the end of this.
I mean, again, well, we were talking about the peak and stuff, but the promising thing is I just named the two games in the last decade that have done side content really well, and one of them was made by the same developer. So,
oh wow, Witcher 3 was my game of the year that year. It was absolutely fabulous. I couldn't fault it. For what you just said, like you said, they're making the side content interesting, and that's what obviously what we're hoping when it comes to Cyberpunk. Their side content is going to be interesting and everything, and fabulous.
And it's integrated as well, like the Bloody Baron quest, right? Like you do the part of the main quest where you have to talk to the Bloody Baron, and you do his storyline to a certain point, and you get the information you need, and you can just leave. But his storyline continues, and so you don't just leave because you're like, well, I want to see what happens in the rest of this person's story, so you continue doing that. So you don't even think about it being a side quest, right? You just do it because you want to see it, you want to do it, you want to play it, and experience it, and that's what The Witcher 3 does so well.
And that's why I think I'm enjoying going back to Inquisition, because even though it does have that fundamental parts where you're doing certain things over and over the same things, but because of what I've said multiple times about Dragon Age Inquisition, the characters, they make it so entertaining and so much fun. I don't mind going to destroy this little wet green blob over here, then go over the other direction to do the same thing again with the amazing characters relationships I've developed.
I suppose what you've just hit on as well, there's two other points, right? So it's like, in terms of Witcher and Fallout New Vegas, it's the reason those succeed is because the side content is done so well and integrated so well with the world and the rest of the game. But there's two other reasons why you would want to keep doing all the side content. The first one is gameplay. and that is exemplified by Spider-Man. Spider-Man's open world is pretty generic. Like, in terms of the content and the side activities, it's pretty bad. But the gameplay is amazing. So you go out and you platinum that game because you just love playing it. And the third one is the characters. So, like, if you just want to hang out and hang out with the characters, or hang out in the story, or hang out in the world, and that's where Dragon Age Inquisition and Origins, like, works. Because it's like, cool, I get to hang out with these characters. Mint. Like, if I do all of this stuff, it's a bit shit, but also I get to interact with the characters more. And I like the characters, so I want to interact with them.
Yeah.
Ubisoft games don't have any. But the most generic Ubisoft games don't have that. There are some that do. But when you're talking about, like, your sort of your contemporary Far Cry's, for example, they're just not. There's no interesting characters in those games.
It is so.
The villains are pretty cool, but they're barely in it.
Especially how good Far Cry 3 was.
Yeah.
But when you look back on it,
but then they just kind of went Control C, Control V with 4 and 5.
Yeah. But it's Voss. That's the thing. He's the one who makes it compelling.
Yeah,
you don't care about the guy who you played.
But it's the same thing in 4. Like, 4 is essentially the same gameplay as 3 in a different world, but the villain's really good.
Yeah.
But he's barely in it. Vass is barely in it. That's why they're memorable, because they're brief.
Yeah, but I think what helps with Vass, you feel him. For me, if I remember right, for me when I was playing game, even though you barely saw him, you felt him around.
You felt his presence at all times.
Yeah, his
right?
presence was there. The presence for me, even though Troy Baker is fabulous, it didn't feel the presence compared to what I did with Voss.
Yeah, no, he doesn't feel omnipresent. Yeah, I get you. But the
good conversations.
They were, yeah. Like, I mean, if you want to keep going, I'm gonna chop the open world part out and use it and do a bonus content video, because it's quite long, and I'm really interested in having this conversation about open worlds now. But yeah, like it's like, yeah, like we talk about open world fatigue, and it's a bit of a misnomer, because what we're fatigued with isn't necessarily the idea of an open world, so much as it is the way open worlds have generally been implemented in most games.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like, because I've had open world fatigue for probably 4 or 5 years, but in the same breath, Spider-Man came out in 2018, and I fucking loved the shit out of it, and played way more than I needed to finish that game, because I enjoyed it. So it's like, that doesn't really mesh with open world fatigue, right? Because there was a reason to invest and engage with everything else that was happening in that world.
Yeah.
That there wasn't, for me personally, in, say, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which came out the same year.
Mm-hmm.
I think. It did, yeah.
Yeah. So it was Spider-Man in September, and Odyssey came out October.
Yeah. Whereas, like,
I think it was 2 weeks after each other.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, and that's where I think it differs. Like, I feel like when open worlds were first a thing, they were amazing just on their own right. And I feel like if we go back to a lot of early open world games, we may look at those and go, oof, this isn't great. But at the time, it was just the novelty of there being an open world. And then what I think's happened is, there's become like this standard open world model almost of like how to do an open world. And then what we need now, because we've been playing these types of games for more than a decade at this point, is like, it's the ones that do different stuff, or like take more care in the things that they're placing in their worlds, that are the games that are standing out more.
Yeah.
And the gap's becoming wider and wider, because for every Witcher 3, Fallout New Vegas, Spider-Man that you play like 3 or 4 more generic open worlds, and the gap gets wider and wider.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, you're spot on there. Shame Ubisoft are throwing out 2 generic games this year in their open worlds. And probably throwing another one out next year with Far Cry 6. So.
I haven't played them, so I can't comment. But from what I've seen, it's more Ubisoft. Like, if am I wrong? Is it just more Ubisoft stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I mean, that's big. I mean, everybody knows why I've decided not to play those games. But like, if we could break it down even further, a big part of the reasons why I don't particularly care that I'm not playing them is because of that. I've played that game. I've played that game about a dozen times, 2 dozen times. Like, Watch Dogs 2 was great. It had nothing to do with the open world. If they took the open world out of Watch Dogs 2 and it was just the story of Marcus and DedSec and all of the missions were just missions, that game would have still been great and I still would have loved it. The world didn't add anything to it, like San Francisco. Like, it was cool driving around San Francisco, I guess, but then like it's just like, man, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Eventually, you're just driving between the freaking objective markers, you know, like.
Yeah, true.